Greetings, fellow time travelers. Welcome back to Ancient Mystery, where we uncover the hidden mysteries of lost civilizations and dive deep into the secrets that shaped our world. I'm your archaeological guide, and today's discovery will absolutely blow your mind. Now, picture this. March 2023. The Grand Egyptian Museum opens at the foot of the Great Pyramids of Giza. Over 5,000 priceless treasures from King Tutankhamun's legendary tomb are finally displayed together for the first time. But here's what most people don't know. There's another treasure, equally spectacular, equally precious, yet almost completely forgotten by history. A discovery so incredible that it rivals Tutankhamun himself. Before we unveil these mind-bending secrets, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss the ancient mysteries we're about to reveal. Everyone knows about Tutankhamun's tomb. His golden mask has become the symbol of ancient Egypt itself. But here's the shocking truth that archaeologists don't often talk about. We actually have several other royal tombs that were found completely intact. And one of them contains treasures that are perhaps even more extraordinary than King Tut's. These are the treasures of Tanis. And fellow explorers, this is something truly remarkable, because it's... Now, here's where the story takes a tragic turn. Nothing like this had been found before, but it never captured the public's imagination the way Tutankhamun did. And the reason, my friends, is absolutely heartbreaking, terrible timing. The discovery of the royal necropolis at Tanis coincided with the outbreak of World War II. Can you imagine? You make the archaeological discovery of the century and the entire world is focused on the devastating conflict unfolding in Europe. The clash between nations, the march toward global war. Suddenly, even the most spectacular treasures of ancient Egypt became insignificant to the public consciousness. So, this discovery never made the media splash the way Tutankhamun did, or the way you'd think it would. Yet it remains one of the most spectacular and extraordinary events in the entire history of Egyptology. And this incredible discovery was the life's work of one man, the French archaeologist Pierre Montet. Although his name may not be as well known as Howard Carter's, Tanis owes its fame to something else entirely, a legendary Hollywood film. Here's something that will surprise you. Tanis isn't just known for its treasures, it's also famous thanks to a blockbuster Hollywood movie. That's right, Tanis is the location where crucial scenes from Raiders of the Lost Ark take place. As shown in that iconic opening, the archaeological site of Tanis lies at the heart of Steven Spielberg's masterpiece. It's where Indiana Jones takes center stage in one of cinema's greatest adventure films. This movie masterpiece was generally inspired by the real, historical site. A city brought back to life by a French archaeologist and his team against the backdrop of a world descending into chaos. But here's what makes this even more fascinating. The real story of Tanis is actually more thrilling than anything Hollywood could imagine. To understand the significance of this discovery, we need to travel 600 miles from Tanis, back in time to 1921. This is where our story truly begins. Pierre Montet began excavations at Byblos in Lebanon. At that time, he was a 36-year-old archaeologist and professor at the University of Strasbourg. And within just 3 years, this brilliant young scholar made discoveries that would change his life forever. He discovered the oldest Phoenician inscription ever found. He identified and excavated the tombs of the princes of the city, some of which were still intact. But when he opened those coffins, he discovered something absolutely astonishing. The rulers there considered themselves friends of the Egyptians, and were buried with treasures that included magnificent Egyptian pieces. The sites were covered with Egyptian treasures as beautiful as they were precious. This discovery confirmed the close ties between Egypt and Phoenicia in antiquity, and this is where Pierre Montet found what he had been searching for. He wanted to trace when these connections began, their extent, and what they meant, not just for the history of Lebanon or Egypt, but for the entire Mediterranean world. He was deeply interested in these connections between cultures. After finding so much evidence of Egyptian presence in Lebanon, a question began forming in his mind. What evidence might exist of foreign cultures in Egypt? And with this goal driving him forward, he found himself in the Nile Delta. One site in particular caught his attention. Tanis. Tanis was a site that had been known for a long time, with a very rich history. It was clearly extremely important just by judging from the monuments scattered everywhere across the surface. It had been excavated to some extent by archaeologists before, but they hadn't finished their work by any means. There was so much still there, waiting to be discovered. Could Tanis hold any traces of the Phoenicians or other peoples from the Near East? Pierre Montet was convinced it could. From 1929 to 1939, Pierre Montet multiplied his discoveries. Within 10 years of excavations, he identified most of the major monuments at this multi-layered archaeological site. Montet made the city begin to emerge from the ashes. What looked like a destroyed city was now revealing its secrets. No longer just a disaster zone, but a thriving ancient metropolis coming back to life. Mapping all of this was a huge boost to our understanding of an urban and religious centre in the Delta, as well as bringing Tanis from the shadows to the forefront of Egyptology. The most important discovery was the Temple of Amun. This massive structure, measuring over 1,300 feet by almost 1,000 feet, is the size of the Louvre Museum. It's a colossal temple befitting the kind of religious site dedicated to Amun, the chief god of the Egyptians. But then, nobody expected new enemies to arrive. The Nazis had been increasing pressure in Europe since seizing power in Berlin in 1933. The entire world was marching toward war. The Nazis were in power in Germany. They were beginning to build a nation that was economically powerful, militarily powerful. And the Egyptologist was growing increasingly worried. He feared he wouldn't be able to complete his work. If hostilities actually broke out, how could the work continue? What could happen if the work was suspended? Think about the political situation in 1939. Why was this such a problem? Because Pierre Montet decided to go to Tanis, where he would make the discovery of his lifetime. This would probably be the most important mission in Montet's excavations, and one of the most significant excavation seasons in the entire history of Egyptian archaeology. January 1939. Despite fears of an impending Second World War, Pierre Montet began his 11th excavation season. When he went to Egypt for this season, Montet had no idea that this season would reveal something unimaginable. Something that would make everything he'd found during the past 10 years fade completely into the background. The Egyptologist and his team moved tons of earth searching for new clues. Then came the stunning realization. If powerful pharaohs had succeeded one another here, was it possible they were also buried here? Where were people buried? Where were the tombs? In the surrounding area, no tombs had been discovered, no cemetery, let alone a royal necropolis. But here's the brilliant deduction Montet made. If this was the northern capital, then logically there should be an equivalent to the Valley of the Kings. The Valley of the Kings near Thebes in modern-day Luxor was home to the tombs of pharaohs from the 18th, 19th and 20th dynasties, including Tutankhamun, Ramesses and Thutmose. The final resting place of these prominent kings was outside the city. We have the Valley of the Kings, with all these famous tombs of the great pharaohs from that period. But after this period, the tombs of kings become lost. And the reason is simple. All these tombs except Tutankhamun's were plundered in ancient times. This drove later pharaohs to change their strategy, especially at Tanis. They decided that instead of burying pharaohs in the secret desert, they would place them where everyone could see them, in the center of the temple itself. We're inside a sacred precinct. Never before had anyone thought of building tombs inside a sacred area. This was a domain reserved for the gods. Pierre Montet continued his excavations around the temple of Amun. He explored a number of buildings made of mud brick, and at one point something intriguing appeared. At the foot of one of the buildings, a circular pit appeared that had been deliberately dug. The workers cleaned it and discovered at the bottom of the pit a stone slab, a very large stone piece. At first he thought it was wonderful. This was the floor. Except it wasn't. But what could it be? Pierre Montet quickly excavated 26 feet of soil above the slab. He came upon a level surface several meters long. The slab seemed to continue until a protruding surface appeared. While cleaning it, he discovered several fragments of what are known as shabti statues, funerary materials that would accompany a funeral coffin. Generally, when you find shabtis, you're probably in a tomb area. There was no room for doubt. Pierre Montet had just made an unprecedented discovery. If these statuettes were there, it was because the deceased's coffin, treasures and mummy were in a nearby tomb. He carefully examined the artifacts and discovered the name of the deceased. And it wasn't just anyone. This was Shoshenq III, a pharaoh from the 22nd dynasty who ruled 400 years after Ramesses II. Pierre Montet learned from ancient texts that Tanis had been the capital of both the 21st and 22nd dynasties. These two dynasties represented one of the darkest periods in Egyptian history. Around 1000 BC, the unity of the empire was shaken after the death of Pharaoh Ramesses XI. He was the last king of the new kingdom, the last of the Ramesside kings. His mother had no male heir to succeed him. He had only 2 daughters. So there were 2 rivals for power at that time. The priests of Amun at Thebes, who had become very powerful, declared themselves kings, and the rulers in the delta also declared themselves kings. The country was on the verge of splitting because we had the high priest of Amun declaring himself king in Thebes, but also the rulers in the delta declaring themselves kings as well. These delta kings were the pharaohs of the 21st and 22nd dynasties. They ruled northern Egypt between the mid-11th century and the late 8th century BC. As for the kings of the 22nd dynasty, including Shoshenq III, they came from one of the tribes of distant Libyan origin who had settled long ago in the Nile Delta. Little was known about where they lived, where their city was located, and their capital had not been clearly defined. We only have occasional references to them in some texts and very few small monuments. We can't really write the history of this period, so this was somewhat obscure. Montet continued his inspection, and at one spot he noticed a slight anomaly. He found a gap between what appeared to be stones of this floor, and he put a rod down and found there was a hollow below. It wasn't a floor, it was a ceiling. Underneath there was a void, and this void was filled with what could only be described as wonderful things. He must have been extremely excited. He must have known that there was a possibility, even if just a completely plundered except for Tutankhamun's tomb. Had this